Okay, then I think let's start. Good morning. Welcome to the second Let's Play of the Expo. Normally in a Let's Play you can only watch others play. This time you get the opportunity to try out something yourself. The Testimonies 360 experience by the Holocaust Educational Trust. I'm going to keep the introduction really short, so you have as much time as possible inside of the experience. And I will just introduce you to the developers of Testimonies 360. That's Clementine Smith, the Director of Programs at the Holocaust Educational Trust, who has been leading the development of Testimonies 360. And Amy G, Head of Digital Education at the Holocaust Educational Trust, who alongside Clementine is responsible for the creation and development of Testimonies 360. Yeah, and I will just give over to you. I'm really looking forward to try it out myself, and yeah, have fun, and I hope a lot of insights.
Thanks, Christian. Thank you. Okay, so what we're going to do today is tell you a little bit about the trust that we work for, the program that we're going to introduce you to. We've got an interactive testimony set up over here, which we'll see how time goes, but if people want to use that, you can. And then we'll do some work with you on the VR headsets. But just to tell you a little bit about the Holocaust Educational Trust, it was founded in 1988, and our aim is to educate young people across the country about the Holocaust and its relevance today. One of the earliest achievements of the trust is that we ensured that the Holocaust was included on the national curriculum for England in 1991, and it remains on the curriculum today. We run several educational programs. The most well-known one is the Lessons from Auschwitz project, which has been running since 1999. That takes tens of thousands of students post-16 on a one-day visit to Auschwitz-Birkenau. It's part of a 4-part educational program, and since 2008 it's received government funding. Our other programs include teacher training, our ambassador program, which works with lots of young people across the UK. We run an outreach program where survivors go into schools and share testimony with school students. In the last year alone, that program's reached over 80,000 young people. They've heard live testimony from a survivor. And we also provide lots of educational resources and lesson plans for teachers. So that's just a little bit of context as to the everyday work that the Trust does. And before we really get into Testimony 360, I just want to tell you a little bit about it to frame what you're going to see. I'm then going to take you through a section of it, and I'm going to sort of take you through how we deliver it in a classroom. So you're all going to have to just think like students for a little while. But I think if I try and do it any other way, it won't make sense. So I'm not going to model it so that you actually have to do the work that the students do, but I want to at least show you what we do with the students, because it's a really scaffolded lesson and it's not just a pick up and put on resource. So I think it's just important that you know how it works. After we've kind of done that bit, we'll move into a section where Clem and I will just show you some sections of VR that we use in the classroom or that we don't, and we'll explain why we don't currently use it. And we'll have a bit more of a sort of informal discussion about why we use those spaces, how we talk about them, what the educational principles were that guided us when we were making those pieces of VR. So Testimony 360 is an immersive digital education program that allows young people to engage with recorded interactive testimony alongside virtual site-based learning. And our aim is to offer students an unforgettable learning experience. It focuses on remembrance, inspiration, increased historical understanding, and fostering a desire to learn more. The program is facilitated by a head educator, and the students are with them for 2.5 hours. They learn about the Holocaust through the journey of one specific survivor, but one of the really interesting things about the program is that they use that narrative to then learn about other people's experiences, not just the survivor that they're hearing from. So they, as part of the program, as part of the classroom session, they have the opportunity to engage with an interactive recorded testimony. We work with the USC Shoah Foundation, and we use their Dimensions in Testimony platform. So that allows students to ask their own questions and hear authentic responses from a survivor within the classroom experience. then once they've done some work with the interactive testimony, they're also able to explore some of the key sites that are linked to that testimony through the headsets. So they look at places like hometowns, points of deportation, camps and spaces that the survivors were in during the Holocaust, and then liberation spaces and current life today. So what I'm going to show you is the first section of the classroom resource, like what we actually do with the students when we go into the school. And we're going to focus on a survivor called Manfred Goldberg. He's the first sort of survivor testimony that we've released as part of the programme, but we also have the testimony experience of Susan Pollock, and we have 2 more that are in post-production that will be due to release in next year, early next year. So, one of the first things that we do in the school session is that we show students this photograph. This is more or less how we start the classroom experience. We don't really tell them many details, although they know who we are and they're not daft, so they know what the session's about. But we don't really give them too much detail as to what the session's going to involve. We ask them what they can infer from the photograph, and we get them to talk to the person next to them about it. So they're just looking at a historical resource. They're trying to figure out what this photograph is, who's in it, where it might have been taken, when, why it might have been taken. So they're having this discussion. And once they've done that, we ask them to sort of come back as a group and work together to share what they think they can see. And we do this because all of our teaching follows the IRA guidelines. So one of the important things that we always do with our educational sessions is start with pre-war Jewish life and what life was like for Jewish people before the Holocaust. So who they were as people, where they went to school, whether they were religious or not, what they ate, all of those kind of things about family life. And so with Testimony 360, that's no different. That is where we start. The biggest difference is that we are, rather than them sitting looking at a textbook, we're asking them to do all of the work. They're asking questions of each other and themselves and the educator, and they're having a very sort of investigative classroom experience.
Can I add one thing just for that?
Go for it.
Just to say, just to give a bit more context, any students that take part in this programme have covered the Holocaust as part of their curriculum before. It's a prerequisite that we have for this programme. Mm-hmm. This isn't the students' Holocaust education, it is to complement the Holocaust education that they have already had. But I think just in terms of this picture, when they arrive, they have learnt about the Holocaust in a classroom setting before.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And how old are
Pardon?
How old are your students?
Year 9 upwards.
Okay,
So that is 15,
So they're
14.
13, 14 upwards.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason that that's the age group that we're working with is because that's when they generally will study it at school. So most teachers will deliver Holocaust education at that point in their school, but sometimes they do it in year 8, sometimes they do it 12, 13. But yeah, it's a prerequisite. It's on this sort of application form. If they say they've done a Holocaust education, then we send them some resources and then say, come back to us when you've done a bit. Because it's just, this is meant to build on that knowledge. It's not meant to be instead of that. So we then sort of tell them that this is an image of Manfred and Herman Goldberg. It was taken in 1938. They're brothers, they're 8 and 4, they're Jewish. We get them to guess which one is Manfred. Any guesses? Is that old? Yeah, old boy on the left. And then we ask them to just spend a minute or two thinking about what questions they might ask these boys if they could. So getting them to think about their lives as 8 and 4-year-olds in Nazi-occupied Germany. In Nazi Germany, sorry. So after they've done that bit of work, what we're doing then is getting them ready to engage with the 2 different pieces of text. So we're talking to them about Manfred, how he was recorded in a studio for 5 days, how we asked him 1,000 questions, how we sort of give them the basics of how we did that, so that right from the start, they know that they are speaking to an interactive recorded testimony. They're not meeting Manfred, they're not having a conversation with Manfred. They understand the difference between live testimony and recorded testimony. And we also then explain to them that they're going to see some of the sites and the spaces that Manfred talks about in the headsets, but that they'll see them as they exist today. We're not trying to sort of recreate something from the past. There's no sound effects, there's no smoke. Like, it's all filmed as it is today. And the reason that we talk to them about the reason that we do that, how those spaces might differ from what Manfred remembers. And it's basically mirroring the way that we do site-based learning in person. The next bit of the school session sort of builds on what Clem was saying about their knowledge that they'll already have. We build on that knowledge. We make sure that they understand where Manfred's from. He's from Kassel. We make sure that they understand the Jewish population in Kassel, the geography of Europe, where Kassel's situated, the diversity of Jewish life in Europe at the time. So we do a bit of work with them about that. Again, scaffolding the learning, building up this information that they have about Manfred so that when they come to engage with the testimony in the VR spaces, they have that background knowledge. And then once they've done that, we ask them to, with what they've heard so far, with what they've seen and discussed in their class, write down 2 or 3 questions that they might like to ask the interactive testimony. And we're asking them to think about, we're still thinking about pre-war Jewish life. So we spend quite a lot of time in the classroom on pre-war Jewish life. So we're asking them to think about things that they might ask Manfred about his life before the war. We then tell them a little bit about what they're going to see in the VR headsets. So we talk to them. These are just some examples of the slides. Did you want to say something? No, leave it later. Sorry, it's fine. These are just some examples of the things that we have up on the screen whilst the educator is having a discussion with them. It was really important that we show the students the spaces as they are today, but these are some historical photographs that we show in the classroom and we talk about, and you'll see when you put the headset on that there are spaces where we've got hotspots, and some of the hotspots, when you open them, have historical images in them, so that they can kind of understand what spaces might have looked like in the past. Yeah, we'll talk more about all of that when we get to the educational principles, and we'll explain all of that in a bit more detail. But I think I've given you a whistle-stop tour of how we get to the first point with the students where they actually start to then engage with the 2 sort of digital assets that we've created. So the first instance of them doing something interactive in the classroom is looking in the VR headsets at Manfred's hometown of Kassel, which Clem is going to set up and get you all into now. But before we do that, has anybody got any questions about what I've quickly taken you through? Does it all make sense? Yeah? All right, so let's get into the VR headsets.
Okay, so first off, I'm going to ask everyone to get your headphones, not the headset, and just unravel the wires. They are all wrapped up neatly from the last class that they came from. Sorry if anyone's... There you go. Okay. So whilst you're doing that, you just look this way. So your headphones are going to, this is the top, this is the bottom. Your headphones are going to plug into the bottom of the headsets. And then once you've done that, and actually on the bottom, just so you're aware, is your volume control. Once you've done that, this here, if you've got glasses on, you can keep them on. This can lift up to put them on. This is to make it bigger and smaller. Make it as big as you can, lift it up, put the headset on, and push it back down. And what we're going to do is, before you put them on, I'm going to show you how to turn them on. So on the top here on the left, there's a power button. You're going to hold it down until the light goes blue. Brilliant, yours is on.
Yours is turned on.
Okay, and once you've done that, I'm going to ask you to, in a moment when I let you know, we're going to all put our headsets on. When you put the headsets on, you're going to see a screen, and it helps you understand how the hotspots work. So on the right hand side, you'll see a diagram that shows you what the hotspots are. So there are different types, one with information, one with historical images, a hotspot that shows artifacts, and a location hotspot, so you move in the space. So you'll see those on the right. Once you've had a look at that, if you can gaze, these are gaze activated, so you'll see a tiny little dot. You gaze at the ready, it says ready, yes, no. Gaze at yes, it'll turn from orange to green. We can then see on our facilitator app that everyone is ready. So if I could get you to, at that point, we'll then start the thing. So what we're going to show you are the first 2 spaces that any students will see. In the first one, there are no hotspots. The first space that any student sees is kind of an orientation space. So they'll hear audio, they'll see a space in Kassel, but the second space that we will move you to, you'll see hotspots there. So later on we'll talk about how we decided where we have audio, where we have hotspots, what types of hotspots. But just so you're aware, that first space is used to get the students ready for the kind of rest of the experience and to give them some context where they're looking. So, final things, this is a seated experience. Please do say seated, and it's 360. So you can look up, down, around you. It's 360 video that you're seeing, so you'll see movement in the spaces. If anyone doesn't want to put a headset on, or they put it on and they're not comfortable, we have 2 accessibility apps here that you can use. You can see the exact same content, hear the same audio, but they're just on tablets instead. So put your hand up if you've got any questions, or you'd rather use one of those. But if that's all clear, I'm going to ask you all to put your headsets on. So a reminder, lift this up first, it's the easiest way to do it. Put that, and especially if you're wearing glasses at the end, make sure you do the same. And final comment, sorry, I will make sure that when we finish this, you will see on the screen it will say let's discuss. That's your indication to take your headsets off and we'll have a conversation. Okay, so you should all be seeing a let's discuss icon appear. If you just take off your headphones first and then your headsets. Don't forget, if you lift up the head strap and you've got glasses on, it won't pull your glasses off with you. Okay, so before Amy or I carry on, I just want you to talk to the person next to you. I'm going to give you kind of 30 seconds, a minute. I want you to just talk through these questions. So it's a moment for you to reflect on what you've just seen. So have a think about how you found that experience, what stood out, what you might have found out about Jewish life in Kassel before the war, and what you think Manfred's childhood was like. So as I said, you've got a bit of time with the person next to you to have that conversation. Okay, everyone, if I can just get your attention back here, thank you very much for that. So the reason we stopped there, just the first piece to kind of talk about how we model this, I'll pass back to Amy in a second, but one of the kind of key things that we discussed when we first started talking about the possibility of using virtual reality in classrooms was that we always need to make sure that we really think about how the student is engaging with the space, but how we give them time to reflect. And with our site-based learning in person, it's something we think really carefully about, how you make sure there are those moments of pauses and reflections. So one of the principles that we have in the classroom is that if a student is putting on a headset, we contextualise what they're about to see, but when they have taken the headset off, the first thing that you get to do is pause, either have some time just to reflect on their own or speak to someone. So that is what we'll always do when we come in and out of headsets. But what I'm going to do is we'll pass back to Amy for now, and as we said, that was the first space that students will see in any classroom.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to take you through the last couple of bits of the pre-war life, pre-war Jewish life section of the classroom resource. So once they've seen those spaces, they've had their little discussion, they've fed back to the front. They then have a minute or two to add to the list of questions that they want to ask the interactive testimony. So at this point, some of you might be thinking, oh, this is quite a slow build-up to them using something, but I think it was really important for us when we designed Testimony 360 that we consider like everyday educational principles, not just about teaching the Holocaust, although those are obviously incredibly important when using technology, but how classroom sessions are structured generally. We talked to a lot of teachers, we thought a lot about how kids learn, and we followed those principles when we designed the classroom resource. So constantly thinking about building up their knowledge slowly so that when they do get to engage with the interactive testimony, they actually get the most out of it. They're not just going into it cold, which is it's how the interactive testimonies, the dimensions and testimonies are used a lot of the time when you do a walk up in a museum, but it's a completely different audience. It's not in a school setting and it's not with young people. So I'm just pointing that out here, that whilst it might seem slow to us, it's actually really necessary when you're working with teenagers. Okay, so then we come to the first instance where the students are able to engage with the interactive testimony. There are a few different options for the way that they can do that in the classroom. They'll all have a laptop in front of them. The resource and the lesson is designed so that they can have like a personal interaction. They can ask their own questions. So they can and they will at some point in the lesson all sit in front of their own computer and ask their own questions. But it might be that the educator feels that the needs of this particular group would benefit from them all asking some questions together to start with, especially if they're a really shy group of teenagers and they're very quiet and they're not really feeding much back from the room. They might just pivot in the classroom, and they might just do it from the front. So they could ask like this class question here, for example, where were you born, and get the students sort of engaging with the interactive testimony as a group before they then go and do it at their laptops. So the educator will kind of choose what they decide to do, where they decide to start. We spend a little bit of time at this point talking to them about, again, reminding them that it's a recording, that there will be some things that Manfred's interactive testimony will not be able to give an answer to because he was filmed in 2022, and a lot has happened since 2022. So they can't ask him about current affairs, for example, or what he's read in the news today, because he won't be able to answer that. So we remind them of all of that kind of stuff so that they're a bit more targeted with their questioning. And we also spend a little bit of time at this point talking to them about how to respectfully ask questions of a recording, because just because it is a piece of technology and it's a recording doesn't mean you can just ask it whatever you want. Manfred is still a real person. Manfred still gave 5 days of his time to answer all of these questions. So we just explain to them that we would like them to focus on questions about Manfred's experience, not to ask him random questions about other things, and to only ask him a question in the lesson that they would ask him if he was there in person. So to still be really respectful of what they say to him. And we also tell them that we can see everything that they ask. We can talk to you all a little bit more about that when we talk about our learnings from the first year of delivery, but we're really transparent with them about that. There's no kind of hidden, we're watching you kind of things. Like we do tell them, we're monitoring what you ask. If you need help, we can come and find you, we can give you help. So we do all of that with them, and we also have this prompt card on their tables and on the screen. So there will be some students who have tons of questions, and there will be some students who don't know where to start, because most classrooms in the UK are very mixed ability. So we make sure that we have lots of opportunity for students who are a bit more unsure to have that extra support. So they have this list of stuff, and some of them are literally, if you ask this particular question, you'll get a response that will be really helpful, that will help you with your learning.
Just to say on that mixed ability point, and I will come to this shortly when we're talking about it, but we knew from the outset that if we were creating this programme and using these two types of technology, that for us it was really important that the session could be dynamic, and there is a rationale for us having a facilitator at all times. That facilitator is important in terms of knowing the class, recognising their needs, but also we knew that we couldn't have something that you plug and play the whole thing, no matter who it is. It has to be dynamic enough to be able to differentiate between different learning abilities and needs.
Yeah. That's as far as I'm going to take you in terms of modelling the classroom resource. Everything that we're going to do from here on is I'm going to tell you a little bit about how and why we developed the programme, and then we're going to get back into the headsets. We're going to talk about the educational principles and the spaces. But does anybody have any questions so far about the way that it's delivered in the school, the resources around it? Does it all make sense so far? Yeah?
I was actually wondering, because you say you ask them to be respectful, do you do that up front before they start questioning? Because I was just wondering if someone happens to ask, I don't know, was the first time you had sex or something that's really inappropriate?
Yeah.
I was just wondering, wouldn't it also be a strategy to then pick that question, be like, okay, of course this is a technological experience, of course you're here only interacting with a recording, but now imagine this was the real person sitting in front of you. Whereas if you already from the very beginning structure the space and like, hey, please only ask about this and that, I was just wondering why you decided to do it this way, and not maybe like the rule breaking happened once or twice, and then take that and discuss it.
We do both. We started off not doing it at all because there's not a huge amount of resource available to us as a team as to what people ask when they're using an interactive testimony, and we assumed they would ask what we were asking them to ask, or what we were sort of suggesting they ask. They definitely don't. So it's been, you'll see by the end of everything that we show you today, we've been on a really massive learning journey. Everything that we thought we were going to do in September, we've had to gradually sort of, adapt and change based on what we're actually seeing in the classroom. So we do both. We when we first started, we weren't sort of telling them, please be respectful with your questions, although we were telling them we can see what you asked, because we feel like that's, in terms of transparency, it's best to do things like that. But what we do is we give them a few very simple lines about respectful questioning, and then if we see that things are happening, then we do what you suggested, and we bring it into the classroom. And we can't see who's asked the question. We can just see that someone in the class has asked the question. So then we just, rather than shut it down or go and try and find the person that did, we just bring it into the classroom as a discussion. The person that's monitoring the questions being asked will alert the educator, you've had this question you probably want to talk about in the classroom. So we do a bit of both, really.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying that obviously, again, I mentioned the facilitator. They are trained HET facilitators. They've worked really hard on, they know the testimony, they know the setup, but also they're experienced in classrooms. So like when I'm delivering this session, I'm not just stood at the front at the point where they're asking questions. You're walking around, you're engaging with the group, you're trying to make sure that you're getting a sense of how's this going. And if there are questions that you think I need to pick that up, usually by the point that someone has flagged it with you, you're thinking, I'm already talking to that student. You kind of have a gauge. So for us, whilst we are using technology, that facilitator piece has always been really important to us, because actually we think, especially given that we've created this for a classroom experience, given the age of the group and their kind of, like we said before, their different ages, their different abilities, their different behaviours, like these are all things we have to kind of deal with day to day. So that facilitator point, we do monitor, and we have changed how we introduce that kind of, how do you ask questions and help model that. You also do have to rely on the person going around and just trying to know the class, and also just to say, we go in and deliver, but we always make sure that the teacher knows they have to be there. You need someone who knows the class. Like, we've all been in classrooms where you've got a supply teacher and no one else, and it's just completely different.
It's a disaster.
We're very clear, there are very clear parameters on things like that, because we want to get the most out of the students for that session, and that's a piece of it.
How long is your session?
2.5 hours.
Okay.
We'll come on to the learnings later, because we used to structure it differently, and now it's 2.5 hours that goes through Manfred's experience.
On the topic of politeness, is there a deeper rationale behind trying to have them be respectful? I mean, of course, there's the part of they're kind of wasting their time if they're asking questions that are just bullshit, sure. But you're also going to great length to make sure to tell them this is not the real Manfred. This is a computer. Honestly, I don't care how you're talking with your computer. The questions are not going to be fed back to Manfred. He's never going to hear what questions 12-year-old, 13-year-old teenagers ask with IDT. So is there anything beyond it's just a waste of time for the student?
I think that's the key point. It's a waste of time. Like the time that they have with it is limited.
Yeah.
But I think for us, ethically, there is a piece around, this is someone who trusted us as an organisation to bring their testimony into a school in a way that would be valuable. And you're right, it is a platform that they are asking a question of, but it is and it isn't. We've recorded someone's testimony, and the second there is a differentiation, and they think, well, I can just be rude because it is a recorded testimony. Do they still understand that what they're listening to is an authentic testimony that was recorded by a real person? And for us, it's a complex piece to navigate, but we're trying to explain to them that you are listening to testimony that was recorded by a real person. It's an authentic answer, but yes, you're accessing it through a platform. But for us, there is a piece around respect there, and we feel very strongly that whilst they have to understand it's a recording, there has to be an element of respect and understanding that there's a real person behind what you're accessing.
Yeah.
Just a couple of quick questions. First, sorry I was late. I had to talk to a student urgently. All got sorted. First up, which age group is this aimed at?
It's year 9 upwards,
Which
so
is?
they're usually 13, 14.
Right,
Yeah.
okay, thanks. And is Manfred still alive?
He is.
Good, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
But I was also asking for another reason. You know how when you ring customer services and you're put on hold and you always get this message saying, these calls are recorded for training and security purposes, and it's purely so that you are not rude to the person on the other end, which is probably good in my case, because sometimes I feel like being rude to them. But would it be an idea to have well, you could perhaps have an announcement to the effect that some of these comments go back to Manfred because he'd like to know how kids are receiving it. Even if it's not true, it might give one or two hardcore idiots in the class.
Manfred would love that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing
Could
I'd
that
say
be
is,
done?
it's definitely something we could do. One thing I'd say before we move on, I know you've got let's get through. Before we move on, one thing I would just say is, whilst we're talking about questions that might come up that might be challenging, the large majority are really great questions.
Absolutely.
It's a very, and again, we'll go to this on the learnings, but no, that's something we could consider actually, like
maybe a little video message.
Like, and actually, like, some of them have like later on said, well, could Manfred come and speak at the school? And we make sure that they, it's something we talk about, the fact that Manfred still speaks and shares his testimony. But
All right, I'm going to move us through to the next bit. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about why we developed Testimony 360. So it will come as no surprise that over the last few years, the Holocaust Educational Trust, that we've been speaking a lot about the challenges that we face organisationally. We've been asking ourselves a lot of questions about how we're going to move forward and how we're going to continue to deliver our programmes. Because we know that when people speak about our work, the two key things that they mention the most are engagement with live survivor testimony. We facilitate that a lot, and we have done for many, many years, and survivor testimony features in pretty much everything that we do, always. There's always a survivor with us, there's always a survivor speaking. So we're really well known for that. We're also really well known for taking students and teachers abroad to sites of the Holocaust in person. And so we've had to consider the question of what Holocaust education and remembrance might look like when we can't do some of those things, when we don't have eyewitnesses still with us to be able to go and share testimony in person. And how do we make site-based learning more accessible to people across the UK, regardless of whether they can or cannot travel? Like, how do we bring that to them? So we've been thinking about how we make our programmes impactful and sustainable for the future, and we knew that what we needed to do was develop new, memorable, engaging learning experiences for people to continue to engage with Holocaust survivor testimony and to be finding a way to enable site-based learning without those restrictions of travel. And our vision for the future is that every young person will have the opportunity to hear from a Holocaust survivor and to see sites of the Holocaust for themselves. So continuing that work into the long term. So we started to think about whether a new educational programme could be a way of us adapting. We started to think about a set of aims and outcomes that we wanted to achieve through our work over the next 5 to 10 years. So that was the starting point. It's like, what do we want to achieve? Where do we want to get to? And the aims that we eventually agreed on are up on the screen here. They became the aims of Testimony 360. So we wanted to explore the possibility of using technology to achieve these aims, but we were always really clear from the outset, and I think there's one thing that I want to be really clear with all of you about, is that the aims came first. We agreed really early on that the use of technology in and of itself would never be an aim. What we would do is look at whether technology could help us achieve those aims, could help us provide really effective and sustainable solutions for teaching the Holocaust. So the programme grew out of years and years of discussion about how we plan for that future when survivors are not with us. Because we know that when survivors speak in schools, the students remember the experience. There's something about the learning that takes place when you hear from a survivor and the learning that takes place when you're on site looking at spaces associated with the Holocaust. But on top of that learning, there's also this experience that students and teachers take away with them, and that's what we thought technology could help us do. Is we can teach the Holocaust in a myriad of ways, but how do you teach it in a way that students really engage with and take something away with them that then stays with them, that they have this memory of the experience for years and years to come? Did you have a question?
No, just...
Sorry, I just saw an arm come off.
No. Just swallowing.
So at the Trust, we've said for years, nothing can replace live survivor testimony. We kind of came to the conclusion after years of thinking about it, what can we do about this? I actually remember the day that we sat there and we were like, you know what, I just don't think there is a replacement. there's lots of things that you can do that will bring different elements of what you get when you speak to a survivor into a classroom. But maybe we need to stop trying to replace that thing, and we need to create something new that will do something similar and will, you know, make people feel something, a connection, and, you know, take away an experience and a memory. So with that in mind, we decided to just stick to what we do well and try and find some way of bringing survivor technology into the classroom without the survivors, and doing site-based learning in the classroom without getting on a plane. So that was kind of our starting point. And then, happily, not happily, I don't know what the word is, COVID came along, and for a moment Clem and I were like, great, like, what we're going to have to stop. Like, we were in the really beginning stages of, we kind of had this moment of like, okay, this is what I think we need to do. But then COVID happened and everybody went into lockdown. But actually what it meant for us as an organisation is that we could start to test some of these theories. We made use of an interactive testimony that had already been recorded, that was of a survivor that we happened to know very well, that we worked really well with. And we very, very quickly made some really short prototype VR films of spaces at Auschwitz-Birkenau, again pre-existing footage that another organisation had captured that we were able to use and test. And we brought these two elements into our Lessons from Auschwitz programme and ran our Lessons from Auschwitz programme online through COVID using those two elements. Instead of having a survivor go to a big auditorium and speak to hundreds of kids, we got them to use the interactive testimony. And instead of taking them over to Poland to see Auschwitz-Birkenau for the day, we used the VR. We actually sent them cardboard headsets in the post, and they used their phones. So it was actually a really important moment for us, because it allowed us to just, in a very basic way, test what we thought might work. And the results were really interesting and helped us build Testimony 360, basically. So the programme launched in 2024. We've been delivering it in schools since then. We go in 3 times a week on average. It's open to all students from year 9 upwards. So like I said, it's age 13 up. We can accommodate about 32 kids per session. So we're always trying to make sure that we're working with a full class. The class in the UK is about 32 students. The session takes 2.5 hours. The students just have to have a laptop or a PC. Usually the teachers will book out like their IT suite for the morning. But we bring everything else. We bring all the headsets, we bring all the headphones. You can see all the cases. So that stuff is travelling around the country day in, day out, which is a logistical puzzle, believe me. And then just very briefly, the programme structure. So what you've seen today is what we actually go in and deliver. But the programme itself is a 4-part programme. The bit that we've just delivered with you is this bit in the middle. What we do is we provide resources for the teachers to use in the classroom before we get there and for when we've gone. So it's like 2 weeks before, they'll do an introductory lesson with their teacher. The teacher just follows the lesson plan. And that is so that whilst we've said, you need to have learnt about the Holocaust, and we trust that the teacher is, when they tell us that they've done that, they have actually done it. We also have this introductory lesson that just covers off some of the basics and gets the teacher and the students thinking about what it is that they're going to engage with and what interactive testimony is, essentially. Then we come in, and then the teachers do a reflective lesson with them. So whilst there is reflection scattered throughout the session that we facilitate, we have a lesson plan for a session with their teacher a week or 2 after, where they can really sort of get into, now that it's a week past since you had this experience, what do you think of it? What questions do you still have? What do you still want to know? So that's the programme structure. So it's not just the bit that we do in the classroom, although that is the bit that you've seen. And there's 2 different delivery models. Usually we do a single school. We'll go in, we'll spend the whole day there. We'll run a session in the morning and a session in the afternoon. But also over the course of this year, we've sort of piloted doing a hub model where we'll base ourselves somewhere for a week, and lots of schools will come to us. And I think this has been quite successful actually in making sure that we can reach as many people as possible. So I think the plan for the year coming is to do more of these. Which is why it says 2 per term, because that's the goal. Any questions about how it's delivered? I think it's all pretty straightforward. Yeah.
I just have a question. So when they're doing the reflection session, do you ask the teacher to share the feedback with you? So
We encourage them to. So there's a bit at the end of the session where we say to them, you know, if you want to do a reflective piece of work, you know, here's some ideas. You can do some artwork, you can write something, you can write a letter to Manfred. You know, you can do all of these things as a response to what you've learned. The teacher is encouraged to share those with us, and often we will share them with Manfred if we get ones in that we think, you know, the survivors all love receiving stuff from schools because it makes them feel really connected to the work that they've done. So yeah, we get them to do all of that kind of stuff, but the teachers don't always share it. You know, sometimes it's there's nothing physical produced that they can share with you, but the teacher feedback from the program has been really, really good, really, really good. So they're obviously, I think the kids are obviously taking a lot from it, and the teachers are seeing that in this reflection session.
I'm going to move on, just again mindful of your the time, onto some of the principles around creating, and in particular I'm kind of, well, largely talking about the VR element, because you've covered a lot of the VRT, but just again ask if there's anything, but I just wanted to kind of talk a bit about the process of the creative process, kind of when we were building this program, what we were thinking about. So the first thing that Amy touched on before was around who this is reaching and how many people. So for us, when we started thinking about this, given the aims that we were talking about, and I think it's worth reminding you all that for the Trust, we educate about the Holocaust, but we also there are elements of our work that are commemorative. So we want to ensure that we are teaching about what the Holocaust was, but that we are inspiring young people to continue to engage in Holocaust commemoration. So this is about that longer term engagement. So the first thing was, it was built for a class of 32, 35, whatever the maximum class size is. We didn't want a teacher to think, right, how do I pick 5 students to take part in this opportunity? So we said, right, from the beginning, we're going to give ourselves the brief that it has to be for a full class. That's what we're going for. So that was one of the things that we were thinking about. We also thought about the fact that once we'd established there were technologies that could help us enhance our offer and speak to that aim, we realised that actually we have to think about the tech limitations of schools. So we knew that we had a responsibility for whatever we created, it had to be accessible to the majority of schools. So the only thing that the school has to have is a screen, either like this or preferably individual laptops. So that's so that they can engage with the interactive testimony. To date, we haven't had a school that can't allow access to the DIT. That part is covered. And then, by the way, it may be that one day we hit a school where that is an issue. We have a backup plan for that. And then the other thing is the VR, we bring everything in. All the school need is one plug. That black box at the side needs to be plugged in. That's it. The rest of the kit we bring in and it's ready to go. And it was really important for us that everything was built for a classroom setting. So for those that have engaged in creating VR, you'll be aware of the fact that as soon as you start down that road, everyone says, oh wow, you could do this. It could be a scale room, you could be walking around, you could have all of this, all of these kind of wow factors. And we said, well, that's really great actually. We have 35 kids in a classroom, very tightly compact sometimes. It needs to be something that works in that setting. So it's a seated experience. It is 3 degrees of freedom. And so you can just sit and spin around, not walking in a scale space. And we knew that it had to be, kind of going back to that ready for classroom use, it had to be a session that was dynamic. If the class aren't responding in a way that you need them to, or they're struggling, you have to have a plan that it doesn't only rely on those things. So we know that we can be dynamic with whatever's going on in the session. We've discussed the fact that tech was never an aim in and of itself. When we were creating the VR in particular, and DIT, we always said that we wanted to ensure that students knew what we were talking about when we were talking about testimony, and that it is survivors' voices. We're not using anything generative that creates testimony, but it is an authentic recording. We talked to them about when it was recorded, and then when we, in the headsets, when they're hearing the testimony, we are explaining that this is a recording from this moment, and it's placed into the VR headsets. And then we had to think about the kind of, I guess, digital safety of the students. So making sure that when they're on the DIT platform, that it is a platform that's secure. As we mentioned, one of the reasons that we work with USC Shoah Foundation is because of the infrastructure that they can offer and that security element. we were able to work with a team that would understood our methodologies and how we would approach it, but their platform allows them to interact in a way where it's just them talking, using the system to ask their questions, and they're not engaging with one another in any other way, so that there's a kind of, we know what's going on and we can see those questions. And the same with the headsets. When you put the headsets on, the students can't click on a random app and start looking at something else. They're not engaging together in a virtual space, and that was really important to us as well. And the other thing was that we knew we were embarking on something that to us felt innovative, felt creative, it felt like we'd researched what we were doing, we had a rationale, but we knew that we had to see whether this would work. So with that in mind, one of the things we thought about was whatever content we capture, it has to be dynamic to use in different ways in future, because either the program evolves or we might say, this isn't working, we need to change what we're doing. So they were key things that we were thinking about. And then the final part I just wanted to mention, two more things that I wanted to mention was, the first part is we wanted to be really purposeful and mindful in the way that we had interactivity in the headsets. So like I said before, the first space you saw, there were no hotspots, and that applies throughout different spaces in the VR experience. We only use hotspots and interactivity where it's adding to the students' learning and understanding. There are some spaces that don't have testimony, for either because the survivor wasn't in that space, and given what we were talking about before, where the students really understand what happened during that history we're talking about and the survivor's experience in that place, we felt that actually testimony isn't always going to be necessary, and the same with hotspots. So you'll see in different spaces there's different levels of interactivity. Sometimes there's quite a bit going on, though we were always thinking about that kind of cognitive load and how much users could really interact with. And then the other thing is the actual setup of the room and the classroom when you're in there, we've thought a lot about. So if you look at these are really, kind of in many ways mundane things to talk about, but for us were really important. We're working with young people, so these had to be suitable for a young person. Headsets weigh different, have different weights. Some headsets have a battery at the front, these ones have a battery at the back. It makes it more balanced. Sometimes people say, that it felt really heavy on your forehead. Usually it's because your battery's at the front, so we were thinking a lot about that. The strap, it can be lifted up and it can be held like this, because sometimes people say it feels a bit claustrophobic. We knew that if they didn't want to put this on, they could lift it up and experience it. The apps, some kids just don't want to use a headset. Some can't use a headset, so it was really important they didn't feel pressure to do that, so we're really open from the outset that there is another opportunity. And then there was, how do we engage with the student when they have the headsets on? So we talk them through how to put it on, how to use it, how to take it off, what to do if they are uncomfortable at any point. And the other thing is, how do we as facilitators engage when a student has a headset on? So when someone has a headset on, if they put their hand up or shout out loud, we don't go over to them and just take the headset off. We know as part of our trainings, there are ways that we do it. We'll go up to someone and we'll say, just to let you know we're next to you, I'm on your left-hand side. I'm going to touch your shoulder so you know where I am. You take them through step by step, and then you say, do you want to take your headset off? Or shall I take your head? Just little things like that matter when you are engaging in content of this nature, but also when you are bringing that content to students in a different format that they haven't experienced before. There is lots and lots of discussion that we had, and principles we agreed on, and things that we've thought about, and there are things that we have changed along the way because we've seen how it's working, and how we might want to adapt moving forward. But I thought it'd be good just to give a bit of an overview of some of the things we were thinking about from the outset, and hand back to you.
Just going to look at some spaces now. I am going to show you, we're going to start with two sites. So I'm kind of showing them to you today in the order that you would see them in the classroom. So there is some sort of order to what you're seeing as well. I didn't want to just have you here, there and everywhere. But we're going to start with two sites. We're going to look at Castle train station, where Manfred and his family were deported to the Riga ghetto from. And then we're going to look at some locations at Stutthof concentration camp, which is where Manfred went after Riga. So we're not going to show them to you in the same way that we would in a classroom. We wouldn't go from the deportation spaces straight into the camp spaces. We would talk in between them. We would have discussions with the students. But because you're not students and we've not got huge amounts of time, we're just going to put them back to back. So we're going to show you the spaces, and then what I think it would be nice to do is for us to just have a bit of just discussion about the space once you come out of it. We can answer any questions that you've got. But I think what would be most useful is if you think about what you're seeing in relation to some of the things that Clem has just talked about in terms of educational principles and decisions that we made, why we might be using that space, why we might have used those hotspots, you know, the journey that the students are going on and what we might be trying to get out of it. And yeah, we're happy to answer any questions as we go, but we'll do that as many times as we can really before the end of the session. Like, we've got a few different spaces that we can show you, but that's kind of how we'll run it.
I'm really sorry, I'm going to just say one more thing, which is meant to be my first point and jumped over it. So all of the spaces that we're looking at, there are three things that we're really open with the students about why we are showing these spaces. And we talked to them about the fact that the spaces they were looking at, so in a session that's based on Manfred's testimony, for example, it's a space that relates to Manfred's experience. In that space, there's something else to be said about the other people that experience that space. And the idea is that we want the group to understand they're engaging with a survivor's testimony, but that wasn't the narrative of the Holocaust in its entirety. Obviously, not everyone survived. There were people engaging in different spaces, coming from different places. So we're trying to kind of unpack the complexity of the space. And then there is the layer of, and what does that space mean about memorialisation today and how we remember. So there are three things that they're thinking about, and again, we come back to throughout the session.
All right, we'll get headsets on.
Okay, so this time you won't have to do the part where it says ready if you put your headsets on. And don't forget, headset on first and headphones afterwards. Put your hand up if there are any issues whilst you want to get started. And in a few moments, the experience will start. If you can't hear any sound, don't forget that your volume button is on the bottom of the headsets.
Okay, I'm going to just do what we do in a classroom and give you 30 seconds to have a chat if you want to. But also just happy to answer any questions that you have, talk about those spaces, just a reminder that we don't ever show the train station and then straight into Stutthof, so you've kind of seen everything kind of pressed together there. One of the things that actually Clem and I thought a lot about when we were building this is how long it's appropriate to have a kid in a headset for, in terms of their learning and their connection to the classroom, because they're in a classroom, they're not, in an experience off on their own for an hour. There's lots of VR stuff that's produced that is really quite lengthy, and that might be fine for that particular audience that it's targeted at, but we have chunked this up into small segments on purpose. That's really carefully considered, because we don't want at any point to kind of lose them in the VR, like for them to just be doing whatever they want in there and just in their own world. They're constantly being pulled back into a conversation in the classroom by the educator.
How much time are the students have for any location? And do you also monitor which hotspots they've already seen?
If you all look this way really quickly, I won't take long. I know.
No, it's fine. I actually was going to suggest that you should see this.
This is the app that we're using to navigate you through. So everything, before I said we've got lots of locations, but we use different places with different groups, and that's dependent on their previous knowledge, like what they know, but also how they're engaging with us and their ability. So we're talking to the teacher before, like what's their knowledge like, what's this group like as a group of learners, like what should we know about them? So we are able to, we just tap on the place that we want to show you. At the bottom, we can see how long the audio is playing for, and then there is a bit of, we call it free roam, so free form. So if we think actually this group is going to need a bit longer to look at all of those hotspots, we can give slightly longer, and then we press a button that says let's discuss, and that the group know from the outset when they see that the headsets come off and it's time for us to have a group conversation. But in this kind of in this particular VR, there are 8 chapters, like chapters in each place. There's a sub chapter, so like different locations we can show, but we're navigating it from that particular app.
And the answer to your question is it varies basically. Okay. Like the Stutthof chapter is split into 4 sub chapters. You saw 3 of them. You saw 3 different locations in Stutthof. So the Stutthof chapter takes about 6 minutes for the students to get through. But like Clem said, if they're like quite a low ability group, we might give them a bit longer, and it might mean that they actually don't see as many different chapters and locations in that particular session. They may only use the headsets twice because we know that it's going to take them longer to absorb all the content and talk about it. So yeah, it depends, but I think actually the Stutthof chapter is probably the longest one. I don't think they're in headsets across the program anywhere longer than about 6 minutes, and that was a very big decision for us. And it's not, there were lots of people that advised us that we were being far too cautious, but after a year of doing that in a classroom, we think it is a good balance.
And it's interesting because we collect feedback from students and teachers, and you hear regularly, oh, we want more time in the headsets, we want more time. But actually it's quite interesting as a facilitator, towards the end of the session, you do see a saturation point. Like,
yeah, they switch off.
At the beginning, they're looking around. At the end, they want to look at more, but they're gazing forward, and there's a different type of interaction.
Yeah.
So we're still not, like, you know, there have been places where we say, okay, they could probably be in a headset for a bit more, but actually overall for that 2.5 hour session, you do see a point where actually as a class they're not engaging in the same way.
Do you have a question?
Were you conscious of the need to ensure that it wasn't too immersive to the point where it could distress them?
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. It's again, like, we had a myriad of different voices that we could listen to. There were a lot of people who thought we, again, were just being too cautious. But I think the thing that really anchored us and guided us throughout the whole process was general principles for teaching the Holocaust. When you use technology, you really shouldn't. You should just be using the same principles, surely. You just use technology in line with those principles. So there are lots of examples of Holocaust education that uses VR that has like sound layered over the top. Everything that you hear in those headsets is ambient sound from the locations that we were in. They may have been sort of like the volume's been turned up, or they've been, you know, they're on a loop or something very straightforward like that, but there's nothing that you're hearing in that headset that isn't in that location. There's nobody shouting, there's no crowd noise, there's no dogs barking, but there are lots of instances where you see those elements being used in the creation of VR about the Holocaust. Everything that you're seeing is real. There's no enhancement, there's no visual effects in the clips, and that is all for that reason.
When we created earlier, Amy mentioned the 360 videos that we used during lockdown. So they were 3-minute videos. Well, I think one of them was actually
a minute. Was like a minute,
and then the longest one was 3 minutes. We actually had different sound in each one. One of them had music, and we were very mindful not to use like overly emotive music. But even after that process, I think we'd been cautious, but we still decided for this not to use music. I'm personally still not convinced that we couldn't use music, but I think at the time that we created this, we thought we have to think really carefully about what we're trying to do educationally and basically err on the side of caution rather than, and actually I think now that we're seeing it more, we can probably start taking steps in other places that we might not have done, but in terms of that piece around the emotive element, we were really mindful of, and at that actually, in particular, I'd say sound was a particular piece that
and the testimony comes into that. Like, a lot of the time the testimony is emotive, it just is, because it's testimony about the Holocaust and it's emotive enough. So there's a lot of instances where if you use that testimony but you also layered it with music, then that's actually doing something that maybe you don't really want to be doing.
And actually I think it was quite interesting the conversations we had across the team about what testimony fits in certain places, and is it too emotive to put that testimony whilst you're in a headset. And the conversation was, but if you don't use testimony that is about the space that you're looking at, what does that mean for their understanding of that space?
Yeah, so you also don't want to sanitize it.
You're like balancing that piece there. But it was I'd say, I think for us that was probably one of the biggest ongoing conversations about how to frame this for this particular group.
Yeah, it was probably silly of me to ask actually, because obviously it would have been something you would have been very, very conscious of. But I mean, it's just interesting to hear about some of the decisions you made about what to put in, what to not put in.
Yeah, and like again, we can come to, like, if we've got time and you're interested, we can talk to you about some of the key things that we've learned specifically from the classroom. But I think we have 2 more testimonies in post-production. They will need VR pieces making for them. We're due to do that in the next few months. And there are definitely, I know for certain that there are definitely things that we will do for these 2 new pieces of VR that we didn't do for this one. But again, just it's about making sure that you are like evidencing that what you thought would work is working, is doing what you need it to do, and if it's not, then just changing it, tweaking it ever so slightly next time you get the opportunity to create new content. So that's the kind of the cycle that we're on now.
And even the point at which we would create the VR, we could have started sooner, but we said we want a year under our belt of seeing this in a classroom to know that when we're making those decisions, we're basing it in something.
On learning, does anybody have any other sort of thoughts or questions about those spaces? I can show you, whilst we're talking, we can show you some of the things that we have for the students to look at. But you, then Daniel.
Actually, about the spaces, but to connect what you just said, because what I'm wondering is, would you have any universities or something that accompany that study-wise? Because we have so little empirical data. Usually, there's so many difficult decisions that you all have to make because we cannot wait 5 years, 10 years to figure out what are the outcomes for specific decisions to be made. But maybe do you have any ways of accompanying all this to figure out what are the right decisions, what are the wrong decisions?
So is the question, are we going to do some research?
Yeah, or have somebody else?
Yeah,
we are very keen to have external, independent piece of evaluation or research about this project. And again, from the point at which we proposed this to our board, we always said key things that we want to make sure are that we are sharing our learning along the way, because we're investing a lot of time and money in this, and that's great for HET and important for us, but actually others can learn from it. So we've always said that we're going to try and share what we are doing, spaces like this, just networking with people, but actually we want something that we do have like an evaluation model internally, but we're mindful that that is internal, and we want to work with someone. So actually it's something we're thinking about at the moment and trying to work out who to do that with. So it's something we're hoping that it will be next academic year.
So that it can capture all the data from year 2 and that they can go and see it in action. And it's not us talking about the program that we've built, it's somebody else kind of looking at it in a sort of critical, in a really critical way, and that will again like help us improve it, make decisions. There's something else I was going to say about that. I can't remember. Oh, and also we'll do all of the interviews and everything for the lab. So that's a thing that I think is actually going to be really important for this project, is for them to talk to the people that made it, but also our educators that go into the classroom, the teachers and the students that use it, because through that conversation and that recording it all, we can outline all of those challenges and those questions that we asked ourselves in a way that then is just banked and captured and people can listen to it, whatever. But yeah.
Did you
have a question?
It was just to follow up actually on a point you made earlier about saturation.
Yeah.
And I suppose the thing that I wasn't certain about was whether you meant they were saturated with the technology or they were saturated with learning through that form. So they stopped looking around, but I sort of stopped looking around as well. Not because I wasn't interested, but because most of the stuff was in front of me.
Yeah.
So I stopped needing to, and so I just kind of wondered whether you've actually spoken to them about that and
yeah, we have. Yeah.
So we do ask questions, and we try and have focus groups. But again, I think it's really important that we kind of all understand that we are seeing certain things that we think might be a pattern. But at the moment, we're quite clear in saying we're not definite yet. And that point there is a really interesting one, because, like I was saying, the students say they want more. So it doesn't feel like they're saying we've had enough, but how they're engaging is different. So what exactly is going on in that moment, we still need to understand more, but it's valuable for us to have recognised it so we can unpack it more, basically.
Thank you.
Might just be that after 2.5 hours.
It's a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot. Like a classroom lesson is never 2.5 hours. Like we have a break.
I was going to say, just to say, we do have a break at an hour. We stop.
Yeah.
And we, even if the teacher says no, we're going to go on, we always say no. There's a bathroom
pause,
break. Get water. Get up. Walk around, because it's a lot otherwise.
But I mean, the session is really dynamic. Like we haven't sort of tapped into the interactive testimony. It's there. If anybody wants to use it, please go and use it. I've set it up. But I mean, we could talk to you guys for like half a day just about interactive testimony. So, so we kind of had to figure out where we would focus, and we thought for this audience, since lots of people seem to already have used an interactive testimony or at least know the basics. We thought we'd focus on the VR stuff. But yeah, what we can do, we've got like 15 minutes left. We can show you some more spaces if you want to. Does everybody want to do that, or would you like to use the interactive testimony? More spaces? Yeah?
Spaces, okay.
All right. Okay. Liberation?
Liberation, okay.
Yeah.
So if everyone puts their headsets back on, I'm going to show you 2 spaces associated with Manfred's Liberation. Afterwards, you'll have a moment to kind of talk about what you've seen, but I'll talk about what we've discussed with groups in those particular spaces. I'll give you a couple of seconds just to get your headsets on. Again, if there is anything that anything you need, just put your hand up. One thing just to say for some context, before I show these spaces to a class, one of the questions that they will have discussed before they put their headsets on is, what does liberation mean? So I'm trying to get them to think about what liberation was, what they understand about liberation, and then they will be looking at the spaces I'm going to show you now. Okay, so if everyone wants to take their headphones off and then your headsets off. That's the last space you're going to see, so you can put your headsets down. If you put them on a chair in front of you or near you, that would be great. Thank you. So again, before I start talking through any of that, feel free to just either stop and have a think about it for like 30 seconds or so, or chat to the person next to you about what you've seen.
Or if you just want to dive in with transfers, you can.
Whilst everyone's having a think about what they've just seen, I'm going to talk very quickly. I'm mindful of time, so I want to get to you if you have any questions. But I just want to say a couple of things about those spaces. So firstly, again, we wouldn't show students those back to back in the same way that we did with you. And actually, there's one of those spaces, the middle one, which was the cemetery, that we don't use traditionally with classes. I've used it with one class, an older group who was an A-level history group who had studied a lot more than most of the students we reach. But firstly, I said about with liberation, for us, one of the things that we were thinking about with that space was how it can help students really kind of engage with misconceptions, what they think they know, and the difference between what they think they know and what is true. So we talk a lot about that's a really interesting space, I think, when you're a facilitator, because when you ask the question of what was liberation, even having engaged with Holocaust education, having had a facilitated session, they aren't always ready to answer that question in the way that you expect. They will usually talk about camps, they'll talk about freedom, but it's quite a hard kind of concept for them to think about. So in that space, when they take their headsets off, one of the most interesting things I hear is that you often hear people go, I wasn't expecting that. It looks a bit like a holiday destination. That type of, they might not use those words, but that type of thing is something that sometimes comes out of a group of students. They're saying, well, this looks really normal. So for us, we're talking about what happened to Manfred, and he's talking about the fact that he was on a barge, that the guards left the barge, they rowed to shore. And actually we're talking about the complex and really messy piece of history right there in that space. It wasn't a really kind of clean bit of, hey, we're liberated, great, that's the end. We're talking about the fact that Manfred and everyone on that barge didn't know what was happening. When they got to the shore, they were recaptured, people were murdered there. They were then marched along the kind of shoreline, at which point a British tank column arrived. But at that point, the tank column went past them, like, what does that mean? And then they came back, and that was really the moment of liberation. But then when you go to the cemetery, you're unpacking more complexities. You might have seen the information that came up about the fact that not all of the people buried in that cemetery were from that barge. Some were on the Cap Arcona, which was bombed. So you've got to, for that space, again, there's a very particular group that I would use that with, and I would have spoken to the teacher about how do we engage with this. So they're two really interesting points, but also I just think for you to see that there are different spaces we'd use in different ways, and actually that cemetery piece, we just don't always have time to use, because you do need that kind of contextual understanding. One thing I'd also say is, just for context about who we are, our team is made up of lots of different experts. We aren't the in-house historians. we have a team that are like trained educators, we have historians, we have researchers, we have different people that have worked on this. So that's in terms of liberation, what goes on. But also I just think in terms of like key learnings, what in that cemetery, you will have noticed there was no audio. We spoke a lot about that. Is it appropriate to have anything over the top of this? How do you use this space? And we do have, we have the 3D model of the gravestone that you may have opened. We kind of spent a lot of time thinking, is that appropriate? And actually, in hindsight, I'm not sure that we would do it again. We did at the time because we thought actually we wanted to be able to people to be able to see what was on. So decisions like that we made, we were thoughtful about. But actually, sometimes you go, did that work in the way we thought it would? Maybe not. And then the final scene I just wanted to mention because it's something that we always finish sessions on. That is something that students will see. And there are a couple of reasons. In the same way that we root how we begin the session and we want people to be thinking about life, it's really important that we do the same at the end, and actually that people understand they have been learning about Manfred, who is a Holocaust survivor, but that is part of his identity. It is a part of it. He talks about it in sessions because he's there as a survivor when he's there live. But actually, if you sit down and talk to Manfred, the first thing he says to you is probably going to be about his family. It might be about, or about the fact that he went to university, which he's so proud of. So we wanted to make sure we finished in a space that helped them navigate the journey that they've been on, but also we spoke to Manfred about what do you want in this space? What do you want people to think about and know about? And that was quite, for us, it's a really nice space, but it's also really interesting to see that that's the space where if you're ever going to hear a group kind of gasp, that's where it is.
They do it.
They go, oh, it's Manfred. Like it's a really kind of nice moment at the end of the session to be wrapping up a kind of narrative in some sense because we are getting to an end of a session, but that they're seeing Manfred through a different lens, and it always leads to lots of different questions. Also, one other thing, I don't know if anyone opened the painting of Herman, but that is the only space in the whole VR experience where you can stop audio by opening something else. The rest of it, again, one of our principles was that actually if audio is playing, then we don't want that to be interrupted. But in that space, we made a decision, knowing that it was a piece of audio that was so important to Manfred and how we were trying to use that space at the end. We actually, facilitators sometimes now explain that that's there. So we say one of them will open audio so you can listen to this and then open that. Some facilitators don't, but it's the only space that you'll see that particular thing happen where the audio can stop and it's interrupted.
Can I just quickly ask about the structure in terms of with the interactive testimony? Do you do the VR and the discussion here first and then move on to that, or is it integrated?
Interspersed. So when we started, we did a session that was testimony related. So they'd do that for an hour, they'd have a break, and then they'd do the VR. But what we found was actually you're kind of going over a lot of similar stuff with two different things, and it was, that everyone was engaging, but actually we decided as we saw how it was being used more and more, that it was more effective, and it helps students with the questions that they then ask using the DIT platform to structure it in a way that is, we started with the facilitator briefly, then we go into modelling how you ask questions, and actually that mystery photo, the very first thing we're thinking about is, A, what do they want to ask, but you're talking as a facilitator about how do you frame the things that you want to know, how do you ask a question. So we get them thinking about questions, but actually we show them the VR content first. And as we said, there's wraparound content, so that by the point that they get to the testimony, and we say, right, this part we're going to have 10 minutes where you're asking about Manfred's life before the war. When they get to that point, they've already been thinking about the content that facilitators delivered, and they've seen the VR.
Yeah,
so
it kind
it's
of follows that pattern then throughout the rest of the session. Like, they'll do a bit of VR, bit of testimony, bit of VR, bit of testimony. But like Clem said, the thing that we learnt very early on is that we were actually just doubling up the timeline by teaching by doing the testimony first and then the VR second, because they were going through the narrative from start to finish twice. And whilst on paper and in our heads at the time that seemed like a logical thing to do, I don't know why. In hindsight, I have no idea. But it became apparent through delivery that actually that didn't work. And when the students was telling us, we want more time with the interactive testimony, we want more time with the VR, the logical way to facilitate that without just dumping them in the technology was to just go through the timeline once and go with an in and out kind of, where both both of those technologies are supporting each other across the whole lesson in terms of learning.
And it feels like, as a facilitator, it kind of feels a bit more natural now. You can
Yeah.
look around, and if someone asks a question, you can say, oh, do you know what, we'll ask that as a group. Do you want to go and you'll have test
Yeah, it's a bit more agile.
set up. Or you might say, brilliant, if you write that down, you can ask that in a moment.
Yeah.
You've got, it flows slightly better, but that's, so yeah, now you kind of, it's interspersed throughout the 2.5 hour session. And usually, not always, but usually, we start with pre-war Jewish life and we get up to the point of deportation, and that's usually where we would take a break. So just in terms of like how you get through that with a group, and then you'll do post deportation. So Manfred arrived at Riga, so we'll go from Riga through to the scene that you just saw there.
Just a quick question. Would you change the last scene that we saw with where we were in the room with Manfred once he's no longer here with us?
That's such a good question.
It is.
Because
But I
right
don't
now
know
it feels
the-
authentic. He's still alive. He might as well be sitting in his living room.
What do you think? What's the?
I don't know. I
I've
actually don't know.
I've
I
actually
was
never.
just, I mean,
I've
I
never
was
asked
super
myself that
surprised to see
question.
him. So I was like, oh.
Well, I think, I mean, do you know what? I think it's a really good question, something we definitely need to think
We
about.
need
My
to talk about that
instinct
later. I think.
My instinct is, but throughout the session, we talk about the fact that Manfred is still alive. So
Yeah, it's
obviously,
really
at
transparent.
that point, you'd be having a very different conversation from the outset.
Yeah.
So it'd be framed differently.
I think it would be a shame not to use it, but yeah, the framing of it would be
Needs to be the
From the
it
beginning,
would be
you'd be
really
talking about
important.
the fact that.
But yeah, with everything that we do and the way that we do it, I can't imagine that it absolutely would be framed. Like we'd just have to rethink the whole thing.
It's interesting because even the part about Ziggy. So one of the people Manfred talks about a friend Ziggy who, when he recorded with us, Ziggy was alive, and he talks about as
the 2 registration cards of Ziggy.
Oh, you
and
may have
Manfred,
seen it.
yeah.
And one of the reasons we drew out this, so these are, we got these from when we were in Stutthof recording. We
took Ziggy on a visit,
Yes.
and they, the lady at the museum was just like, oh, we have your registration card, and me and Ziggy were just like, what? And then it was just there as part of the museum display. So when we went to film Manfred, we were able to kind of bring his card into play and have the two together. But it's one of those threads that runs throughout the program, and one of the principles that we work with is that Manfred is like the anchor point for everything else, but if we can bring other stories, other survival stories, other stories of people that did not survive into the narrative and the learning for the session, then we do it at every opportunity that we can. But Ziggy is a really easy one to bring into the Stutthof narrative because Ziggy passed away a few years ago, but him and Manfred knew each other right up until Ziggy died, so it's a really long friendship. We're out of time, aren't we? Yeah.
I think it's fine because we have a break, so everyone who wants to get a break, you can just